just the most indefensible logical fallacy is when they say, no, God doesn't send people to hell. People choose to go to hell.
Yeah.
Like, oh, isn't that just the most hilarious belief ever? And see, here's the rock and the hard place that Christianity gets caught between in this topic of hell is that they can't give the devil credit for sucking God's children into hell, because then, even by the most conservative estimates, the devil beats God 3-1 in God's universe, right? The devil takes the 75% of the world that isn't a confessing Christian, sucks them into hell and says, neener, 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 I got your children. And God has to be satisfied with a measly quarter of them.
Right.
So the devil beats God. So they can't have that. So they say that it's not that the devil takes the children away from God, but it's also not that God sends them there, because then we have this evil pagan deity. You know, we can't have that. So people choose it. Ah, that's the answer. They choose it. And so I'll say, okay, so how do you picture this happening?
Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and I'm excited, delighted, very honored to be joined by Aaron Abke. Let me tell you about this incredible guy and what he's been up to. Aaron is a paradigm-shifting spiritual teacher that delivers a fresh new perspective on metaphysics and ontology. For those of you who don't know, ontology is a branch of metaphysics dealing with the nature of being. Through his teachings on the Law of One, A Course in Miracles, and Spiritual Intelligence, Aaron aims to provide humanity with tools, knowledge, and practices needed to aid our collective ascension to enlightenment, or fourth density consciousness as it's known. His passion and purpose is to awaken this planet to the awareness of our oneness and collective destiny as an enlightened civilization. And he has an awesome mission statement, which I want to read to you, because you got to stick around and listen to this man and listen to this conversation. He's here to show the world that enlightenment is absolutely available to anyone who wants it. That freedom from suffering is not some lofty and unattainable goal, but it is in fact your destiny. And his mission in this life is to assist humanity in that spiritual evolution to the next level of consciousness. So without further ado, Aaron, welcome. Thank you for beaming in.
Thank you for having me, bro. This is really fun to be on this pod with you. I've also heard about your work through the grapevine and my followers, so it's cool to finally lock horns with you, bro.
Absolutely, man. It's exciting. So, man, we have a lot in common. We have kind of a very Christian upbringing. I was raised Catholic. I know you're the son of a pastor, and that was your dream growing up. You were always going to follow in your dad's footsteps, right?
Mm-hmm. It sure was.
And I thought maybe that would be a good place to start, because things changed once you got in that position for you.
Yeah, to say the least. My dad's church was very evangelical, spirit-filled. We did not emphasize the dogmatic theologies very much. Biblical inerrancy, the rapture, hell, eternal conscious torment. Religion was kind of a dirty word for us. And so I didn't have to grapple with those dogmas very much, because we just wanted to talk about the love of God, the love of Jesus, and we were doing miracles and signs and wonders. And we had, for a while in the 90s, my dad's church, it was called Springs of Life Fellowship in Sunnyvale, California. It was like the church to be at in the evangelical world. I don't know if you're sort of familiar with this, Faust, of how this works in the Christian world, but in the evangelical world, there's churches every so often that will have what they call revival, where, and to me, being a student and, somebody who's very devout in studying metaphysics, I've thought a lot about my experiences growing up in church and how to explain them from a metaphysics standpoint. And it seems to me that, number one, community is a technology that we have barely begun to tap into. But the people who are tapping into that technology the most are probably the evangelical Christians. Because I grew up in that environment of seeing blind eyes open, deaf ears unstopped, cancer healed, people getting out of wheelchairs, leaving their crutches at church. I've seen every miracle you can think of. And it was normal to me as a kid to see miracles and to see people falling out under the power of the Holy Spirit and stuff. And I mean, we could talk about some crazy stuff I've seen.
Cool.
So the technology to me is when you get a group of people with charged up energy and passion and inspiration to focus on one collective goal or intention. Even the Bible says, wherever two or more are gathered, I am there in their midst. It's like there's a lot of metaphysical implications to that, I think. And to me, the Bible is a book that teaches metaphysics, but from a very ancient world metaphorical perspective. And so you have to have a bit of that Jungian or Joseph Campbell approach to it to really unpack what it's speaking to. So that's how I grew up, no fundamentalism. And then boom, I graduate from ORU with my bachelor's in theology and music. I begin as a full-time worship pastor in San Jose at a church called Crossroads Bible Church. I don't know if they're still around. I bet they aren't. But
Probably
that was
not.
my wake-up call to Christian fundamentalism. I was at this church as a full-time worship pastor and just being inundated with dogma. And really the big one for me that was the biggest wake-up call, there was 3 moments that happened that shocked me out of my religious slumber at that time. The first one, though, was there was a lady who went up to give an offering testimony. Have you heard of those or seen those in church?
I think I know what you're talking about.
Okay. It's when a pastor gets someone from the audience or the congregation to come up to the stage and essentially give some sort of speech about why I give 10% every week and this is how God has blessed me, and so that's why you should do it too. So it's like if only the pastor's begging for money all the time, it starts to look a little sleazy.
Yeah.
So they have to get the congregation involved and look, it's not me, she's asking you for money, So offering testimony is a big part of church culture. And this woman gets up and she's teaching on stage about whatever her testimony was. And I wasn't even listening to her because behind her, about 4 or 5 feet just behind her, was a man with his arms behind his back, looking stoic, looking holy. And I'm like, what is this guy doing up there? And in my mind, I'm thinking of the verse in, I want to say it's 1st or 2nd Timothy. I consider it a shame for a woman to even speak in church. And if a woman should speak in church, she should cover her head because Eve sinned first and then Adam. Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived. But the women can be saved through childbirth. Just like these unbelievably bigoted passages from Paul. And it's like, I don't blame Paul for that. He was born in the 1st century, 2,000 years ago in a patriarchal society, but I blame the people who are still teaching it in the 21st century, right? And so I'm like, surely, this man is not her husband who's standing behind her as her covering, like Paul says. There's no way I'm working for a church who takes the Bible that literally.
Yeah.
Because I never really took the Bible literally like that, as a fundamentalist does, but there was some wiggle room, right? Sure enough, she gets done, she walks down, and the man grabs her by the hand. They walk down the stairs together, and they sit down and hold hands. And I'm like, shit. That is her husband. And this church does believe that bullshit. And so I'm like, this cringy kind of feeling swept through my body. And I'm like, am I working at a church that thinks women are inferior to men?
Right.
I'm like, does everyone here believe this? Like, I got to get out of here. I'm in a cult,
Yeah.
And that's the first thing that really woke me up because of the bigotry from Paul I couldn't explain. And it drove me kind of batty because I'm this devout, golden boy pastor's child, full-time pastor at 23 years old, going into ministry, 3rd generation pastor's son. I want to defend my faith. I want to be able to defend Christianity to people. And whenever an atheist or a skeptic would point out Paul's bigotry, it would drive me nuts because I couldn't explain it away with all the apologetic gymnastics Christians usually use to say, oh, this thing that looks on its face extremely bigoted, actually, it's not. You just aren't interpreting it correctly. It would drive me crazy to hear Christians do that. And I'm like, I'm not going to gaslight people like this and drive them away from Christianity. I'm going to be honest and say, you know what? I don't know why Paul said that. Maybe it was just the world he lived in, and maybe the Holy Spirit doesn't want us to take that literally. But that wasn't good enough for my Christian friends and pastors. They didn't like that approach to the Bible, and I was quickly castigated as a heretic and all of that. And that's what really woke me up to say, okay, I don't want to be around people who call me evil for trying to defend my faith in an honest way.
Yeah.
And so that's what began my journey into Eastern mysticism and coming full circle back to Christ consciousness many years later.
It's, I was in Catholic school my whole life. I was an altar boy unscathed,
okay.
Thankfully. But I had a lot of questions growing up. I was never, I was a class clown and I was in a lot of trouble, and most of the
Nice.
time. But I had honest questions, that the nuns and the priests, really could never answer, and I would be scolded for asking them when they were sincere questions, and so it was, it wasn't so long that I just kind of like, it was a lot of guilt, it was a lot of shaming, for when you're growing up, as as a boy, you have different inclinations and biological things that happen, and
That was one of the worst ones for me.
it's like I couldn't figure out. All I knew is by the time I was 12, I was pretty sure I was going to hell for my thoughts alone. You know what I mean? And that's no way for a 12-year-old to try, as if the trauma growing up for most people isn't enough. Then on top of that, you have this, like I was praying for my soul at 12 because I thought I was doomed. I mean, that's a lot for any kid to try to, reconcile and live with and work out. So I kind of drifted from the church after that. So I had a similar experience, but gradually.
Yeah. I feel you, man. It's all pervasive in all types of Christian denominations or branches have this problem that there's many logical fallacies and contradictions. To me, most especially Christianity, and I'm including all types of Christianity, Eastern Orthodox, Catholicism, Anglican, Protestant, all of it has the most contradictions in the area of ontology, the nature of God, in that I don't believe the vast majority of Christians investigate their ontological beliefs about God farther enough to understand where they're contradicting themselves. And I think many Christians don't investigate them at all because they feel like they're getting a vacuum-sealed theology delivered by a pastor that I don't need to question it because this intelligent man who's smarter than I, he has a degree in theology or whatever, he's thought about it, he's been to seminary, and he came to these conclusions. Who am I to disagree? How could I possibly know better?
Right.
And people gaslight themselves in this way to not acknowledge the things that are obviously contradictory. And so when I debate or discuss with Christian scholars or theologians these topics, I always go to the area of ontology because I find they have by far the most difficult time really coming up with a substantive argument to defend their beliefs that God is omnipotent and yet can't look at sin and has to send people to hell because sin is kryptonite. And it's very funny, actually, when you break down all the contradictions. It's pretty much on every point, omniscience, omnipotence and omnipresence. They say they believe those things and they'll bang the tambourine at church. They, amen, brother. God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. Right. Amen. And then they believe everything to the contrary when they talk about hell and biblical inerrancy and violating free will and the devil. And it's nuts.
It is a little nuts to me. People are like, I'm sorry for you. I'm going to pray for you. I'm like, listen, I talk to God every day, and we have a wonderful relationship. So thank you. But you don't have to pray for me. Me and God are good. And and people are like, well, you need to find Jesus. I'm like, me and Jesus are good too. But it's amazing how people are so quick to, they're indoctrinated, and it creates this separation, not just with their relationship with God, in my opinion and experience, but with other people who may have different beliefs than them. And, I look out at the world and I see this is one of the major causes of all strife, all war, all suffering, is this notion that if you don't believe what I believe, then, there's
you're
no
evil and you're going to an evil place.
Exactly. So I feel you, man. I know in 2017 you had a spiritual awakening that also was a huge paradigm shifting event for you. And I think we have to talk about the law of one because a lot of people have heard of it, and obviously we don't need to do a report on it. But I know that changed your life. I know that channel material changed your life, and we have that in common because that absolutely happened to me on my journey as well. I found, I began studying, and I was a student of Dr. Joe Dispenza's, and still am, and so meditation became an everyday practice for me. And from there, I found Neil Donald Walsh and Conversations with God, that trilogy he channeled and wrote. A Course in Miracles, Jane Roberts, so many, and it just resonated with me so much. I could not read enough of it or start to embody it in my life enough. And I know that you had, a pretty intense spiritual awakening in 2017. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It was, it was really my second spiritual awakening in many regards, because the first one was out of my religion. And then the second one was out of myself at 27, 28 years old. I was working as a personal trainer at Google at the time in the Bay Area. I had left my religion, gotten divorced from my Christian wife, who I married at 23. All my friends think I'm a heretic. I have no friends at all. My family thinks I'm a heretic. My parents are letting me live with them, but they're very concerned. And, I have to live with this heavy energy all the time. And then you add to that the existential crisis that is questioning a religion or a religious worldview. It's not an easy thing to do. And it makes you feel like your framework of reality gets upended. And that's very discomforting and disturbing and difficult. And so all these things were coming to a head at once, and I was dealing with very severe depression at that time. And so what I would do on my lunch break every day for a 3 or 4 month period was I would go up to the balcony above the gym I worked at, the kind of Google like lunch area where you'd get food, and then there's a patio outside. And so I would go eat outside, and I would listen to an Eckhart Tolle lecture while I relaxed for an hour and watched the clouds pass by and all that. And it was the only time a day I would get some relief and some respite from my suffering. And so I very much looked forward to my lunch hour. And one day, a couple months into doing this routine, I was listening to a lecture where Eckhart was making light of things our ego says to us. And the audience would laugh, he would laugh, and then I would laugh. And this kind of cycle went around 4 or 5 times. And he would say, if only people would recognize how important I am, then I would truly be happy. And then he would laugh, ha, 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 ha. And then I started laughing. And as I was laughing, laughter is a very powerful way to realize things, right? I realized the truth of what he was saying. That, there's this kind of tape recorder on a loop in my mind, and it says the same things to me it says to everybody. So how can I possibly believe that I am this voice in my head that's always depressed and anxious and scared and skeptical and resisting and attaching? It's got to just be a mental program of the human brain, not what I am. And that realization was so crystal clear that it just snapped me out of the personal self altogether. And I describe it, you can't describe these kinds of experiences at all. And it's almost frustrating to try. But it felt as if a curtain was pulled back of some sort, and I was just kind of permitted into another realm. It wasn't like there was no trumpets blaring or something. It didn't announce itself. It was just like all at once, everything changed. And I'm looking around and I see just indescribable oneness and vastness that is expressing the divine mind. And I look at myself and I'm an expression of the divine mind. Oh, that cloud is an expression. Oh, everything is a divine idea in the mind of God. And it was this very childlike thing that caused this tremendous laughter of joy and childlike joy. Of, wow, everything's just ideas in God's mind and it's all perfect and beautiful as God is. And here I am stressing about hell and the rapture and bullshit like that. Like what a joke life is. And I'm just laughing and laughing hysterically. And then the beauty of that laughter turned into weeping. And so I went kind of in this manic state, probably back and forth from weeping to laughing to weeping to laughing. And it wasn't until kind of the end of the experience that I realized I was sitting, 20 feet away from a bunch of Google software engineers who were like, this guy's on a lot of drugs.
Yeah.
And I kind of was. I was high on reality for sure. So I floated downstairs to my next personal training appointment, and I was in that exact state for 2 weeks unbroken.
Wow.
I did not experience a personal self. I did not experience any kind of suffering. In fact, I do remember, I don't really have a lot of memories from that 2 weeks other than the way I felt and brief little moments of being at like a bakery in San Jose with my girlfriend and just feeling like I was in heaven or something. But one of the biggest ones was not having an experience or memory of suffering. And I would try to recall it because I remember that there's this thing called suffering that has defined my life up to this point. And yet, what is it? And how does it happen? How did I ever suffer? It was like that. I couldn't remember why I suffered because reality was so crystal clear. And this is the way classically that enlightenment is described, right? Is that it just leaves nothing in its wake. It leaves no footprints behind it. It changes everything because it changes your perspective of yourself and reality. And so it was 2 weeks in that state of absolute joy and peace and bliss and Christ consciousness. And I woke up 2 weeks to the day, looked at my phone when my alarm went off to get up for work, and I realized it had been 2 weeks. It was two Tuesdays later. And the first ego thought sparked back online and said, wow, it's been 2 full weeks in this state. I wonder if this is it. I wonder if this is enlightenment. And suddenly there was a personal self trying to claim the enlightenment. Like I had reached a state called enlightenment. And so I liked that idea. Wow, maybe I got lucky, like Eckhart or Ramana Maharshi, and I got that one-shot kill ego death. I don't have to go through all the pain of gradually dissolving the ego. Maybe this is going to be a permanent state. And that was the end of the state, my friend.
Just like that. Yep.
Yeah, so that's a brief glimpse into the experience that led me to where I am today.
That's incredible that you had 2 weeks in that state. And
little free sample of enlightenment.
Yeah, amazing. You know, it's I had a moment similar to yours. It was kind of a, you know, where I facepalmed myself and was like, of course, you know, where I could no longer imagine things the way I used to after that moment. And it was, and I talk about this moment sometimes because it was profound. And I think sometimes, especially if you have an upbringing like mine, you know, hearing something like this, it could make you contemplate things in a new way, in a healthier way. And, you know, I had Dr. Joe Dispenza say, and he doesn't get into religion. He's very, you know, he's very wise the way he goes about teaching meditation and you know, the process of changing and the, you know, what happens in the brain and what you need to understand about what's going on. But he said, you know, do you think that, he said, come on, I have children. He said, who has children? And I at the time I had young children. I had babies. And he said, which one of you would, regardless of what that child has done, banish that child to eternal suffering? Could there? And I was like, oh my God, you know, there really is nothing that, I mean, there's nothing they could ever do to me, including, you know,
obviously
take me out, you know, like with my last breath, I will always love them, you know, and forgive them. And I'm like, I can't be more, you know, merciful than the Creator, right? So how, all of a sudden I was like,
well, brother, you're making a God in your own image. That's the problem here. God's ways are higher than our ways.
Yeah.
That's the response.
That's the response I get. And I'm like, well, you can't understand, you know, and I'm like, well, but it seems pretty obvious and simple to me now, you know?
Well, I agree, because let's look at that pat answer that you always get when you say that to Christians. What is that implying? Are you implying that God is more violent than I am? Like, I wouldn't torture my kids, but God would. His ways are
Right.
higher. Higher as in more violent? I'm pretty sure that verse is implying the opposite, right? I'm pretty sure it's implying that we're the ones who are violent and wrathful and punitive and vengeful, and that God's ways are higher than man's ways. Because if we have a God whose ways are violence and vengeance and punishment and judgment, well, then we have a God in our own image, for sure. That is the human sin nature, to be judgmental and vengeful. But if we have a God who overcomes sin with mercy, as Jesus said, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. If we have a God whose love is infinite and boundless and can forgive even the worst of sinners and redeem them and restore them from their sin. If we have a God who understands why people sin and doesn't want to punish them mindlessly for eternity, but wants to save and heal them. If we have a God that looks like Jesus, then we have a God whose ways are higher than our ways.
Right.
It's not God's ways are violence and our way is mercy. It's ridiculous to assume that,
It is.
but that is what the pat answer is implying, is I know that you're merciful, but God's ways are higher.
Right.
It's a very kind of sick thing to say when you think about it.
It is. I believe it's, if there is such a thing as blasphemy, and for my listeners, I'm using air quotes because I don't believe there is truly such a thing as blasphemy, because
Of course
we're all
not.
extensions of the creator, and who are we blaspheming?
And what does that mean? Are we staining God? Is God
Right.
negatively
God up there
impacted?
taking notes about who's saying what? I mean, like, how do these concepts and ideas still fly? I don't know. That's why I think it takes an entire childhood to indoctrinate and to get them
Yes.
to, go along with this thinking.
You have to drill these ideas over and over to get people to truly believe them, because they contain so many fallacies. Like right there, when you say, oh, that's blasphemy. Oh, there goes omnipotence.
Right.
Oh, God is somehow negatively impacted. Oh, he's angry that I said
Very
that.
offended,
There goes omniscience.
Right.
Oh, he's going to send me to hell forever separate from him. There goes omnipresence. You're just casting away everything you say you believe about God when you make these statements, but it's not so obvious on its face that you're saying that. So I get why they don't realize they're saying that. But like one of the worst ones to me, just the most indefensible logical fallacy, is when they say, no, God doesn't send people to hell. People choose to go to hell.
Yeah.
Like, oh, isn't that just the most hilarious belief ever? And see, here's the rock and the hard place that Christianity gets caught between in this topic of hell, is that they can't give the devil credit for sucking God's children into hell, because then, even by the most conservative estimates, the devil beats God 3-1 in God's universe, right? The devil takes the 75% of the world that isn't a confessing Christian, sucks them into hell and says, neener, 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 I got your children. And God has to be satisfied with a measly quarter of them.
Right.
So the devil beats God. So they can't have that. So they say that it's not that the devil takes the children away from God, but it's also not that God sends them there, because then we have this evil pagan deity. We can't have that. So people choose it. That's the answer. They choose it. And so I'll say, okay, so how do you picture this happening? Is there a diving board over the lake of fire?
Good luck.
Yeah, and people are just lining up to dive into hell of their own free will. It's like they have this choice between the infinite love of God and eternal conscious torment. And they're like, screw you, God, double middle finger. I'm going to dive into the lake of fire.
You know what?
Like, what does it mean to say people reject God? Surely they're just rejecting their own mental version of God that they've seen through religious hypocrites and logical fallacies in religion. Maybe that's what they're rejecting. How do you actually reject the source of all life and love and peace and happiness? I've never heard a good answer for that question.
I don't believe it's possible.
It
Even
can't
for
be.
the
Or God's not
atheists.
omnipotent.
I think it's very short-sighted for people to imagine that. But I think that's part of the reason religion came about is as a form of governance, and it's very easy for people to forget that, because they get caught up in the zealotry of it, and the devotion it requires if you wish salvation, but then you start to look at, like, okay, Rome and Christianity and some of the traditions that were lifted right from previous, I don't want to say religions, but customs, and made into a way to put everyone into a uniform and get them to fear for their life and pay taxes and listen to what the emperor says. The emperor and the pope became buddies, well, they became partners in crime anyway, I think.
Yeah, that's more accurate.
Yeah, that's probably more accurate.
That was pretty
statement,
generous of you, man.
And you learn about, like, Pope Vigilius and Emperor,
Pope Damasus, oh my goodness. Yeah.
and like what they did
Constantine.
to concepts like reincarnation and why they did it. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. If you're like me, you're like, what other concepts were kind of part of early Christianity, and did they decide that those aren't going to help fill our coffers and make people obedient and fearful and keep them coming every weekend? So let's get rid of this notion, because if everyone is the son of God, well, that doesn't make Jesus very special, right? So it's like, there's so many gymnastics they do. It's nuts.
I mean, 100%. And staying on that topic of, eternal punishment or whatever, people choosing hell, the real big question there is free will, right? Because they'll say, and I heard someone say this, or I saw someone say this, I think on an Instagram comment on one of my reels. They said hell, it was a reel I made about disputing the Christian version of hell. And they said hell is the great symbol of free will. Like,
my God.
wow, can you imagine
Wow.
thinking that? Okay, so tell me where the free will is in this equation.
Yeah.
Faust, if you don't confess me as your Lord and Savior, I will torture you for eternity. Now,
Yeah.
do you
Free
have a
will.
free
There it
choice
is,
now?
right there.
Yeah, that's free will. Imagine it's like a wedding proposal with a gun to the bride's temple. It
What
doesn't
kind of
mean
a
anything.
hypocritical, maniacal, like God, deity would give their creations free will and then, literally torture them for the rest of their existence for using it? That it's just, how do you reconcile that hypocrisy? It's insane. It's
Well,
insanity.
I mean, we both certainly believe God gives people free will. We're not saying he doesn't. We're saying that a choice between confessing the Nicene Creed or being tortured forever isn't free will. In fact, it is the total, utter removal of free will. If you propose to a woman with a gun to her head, would anyone say that her yes was given out of her own free will? And how much more insane is it when you stack that up against eternal conscious torment? I mean, if God hated free will, he would invent the Christian theology.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like to just
well
completely
put.
obliterate free will from the universe, confess or be tortured forever. Like confess or die would be way more merciful.
Right.
And so like, I do appreciate how the Christian view of hell seems to be evolving, thankfully. After centuries of suffering under Calvinism and these crazy doctrines like sinners in the hands of an angry God, is pictured like God from birth, God is dangling every soul over the lake
Right.
of fire, and he's like, "Are you going to confess my son or not? You don't have to. You don't have to. But I will drop you. But you
Right.
don't have to. But are you going to do it?" And it's like, what a psychopathic universe we would be in if that was true, and it would be a universe utterly devoid of free will. And so, thankfully, that's obviously not the universe we live in, but even outside of the mountains of evidence against this idea in the Bible, the best evidence to me is near-death experiences. Near-death experiences flatly disprove that we are living in some kind of Pauline universe of we have to confess Jesus or we burn in hell forever.
Right.
I mean, even Paul didn't say you burn in hell if you don't. He didn't ever teach about hell, but nonetheless, that's the Christian idea today, right? When you listen to NDEs, and when I left Christianity at 23, when I had my first wake up, I became obsessed with NDEs because I was going through this kind of closet atheist phase. And after living 23, 24 years of a lifetime being intensely passionate and devoted about my faith in God, losing God was the most painful breakup I'd ever been through. And I didn't want to lose God. I wanted to believe in some semblance of a creator. But all I knew is I absolutely rejected the Christian version of God. And so I went to near-death experiences because I figured if anybody knows what's true, it's the people who've died and come back to talk about it. Let's see if they all have a consensus or there's commonalities, right? And so I bought every NDE book I could find. I'd spend hours a day, literally hours a day. I'd be at work on my phone reading NDEs between sessions and clients on this website called NDERF.org, which stands for Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, which was created by two scientists in the late 90s who were trying to compile the data of this incredible experience, this phenomenon called NDEs. And so they've cataloged tens of thousands of NDEs since the late 90s. I think hundreds of thousands by now. And you can go on YouTube and watch NDEs all day long. And it is just incredible, man. When you do this, the commonalities are at least 90% across the board. They will all describe the same archetypal events. Every experience is unique, very unique, and yet they all seem to contain these elements of leaving the body, exiting the body, but still being very conscious. And most NDEers will say, I felt far more aware and awake and conscious than ever before. In fact, my human lifetime felt like a dream by comparison. They'll say that. And then it's going towards the light, and the light is always felt as this unconditional love and non-judgment. And then it's the famous life review where they watch their entire life over again, but they re-experience both the good and the harm that they did to others from their perspective to get this 360 view of all the sin in their life and where they didn't measure up to the standard of love. And of course, that creates them kind of like the Scrooge effect, right, from the Christmas Carol, where when he finally meets his demons and his shadows, he realizes what a prideful
shit
SOB
he's been.
he was. Yeah, and he falls on his knees and begs for forgiveness and becomes this incredibly loving man by the end of the movie. It's a beautiful story. It is the story of NDEs, man. This is what everybody says, is they come back with this new vigor to do what Jesus said, which is love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, if you do this one commandment, you fulfill the entire law. And this was the only way Jesus ever explained the way to salvation. Jesus never made a statement about needing to confess him as Lord, needing to believe he was resurrected, or that we're saved by faith alone, or any of the stuff Paul said about him. It was Mark chapter 10. Teacher, what good work must I do to enter eternal life? Keep the commandments, most especially love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And so NDEs totally disprove the Pauline idea that we are judged by faith alone and whether we confess Jesus. I have not read, and I've read and listened to thousands for sure of NDEs at this point, many of them from Christians, by the way. And I've never seen anybody or heard of anybody coming back saying, I was judged based on whether I confessed Jesus or not.
I had 3 cardinal sins, and I was pretty much screwed.
And exactly. And in fact, even more than that, almost everybody comes back saying, I learned that your beliefs and what you say you believe is worth nothing in eternity.
Yeah.
Eternity could care less what beliefs you have in your brain or what you say with your mouth.
Right.
Faith without works is dead means unless you do the works of what you say you believe, you do not believe it, period. Yep. End of story. And that's why Jesus said, Lord, Lord, please let us into your kingdom. Whoa, 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 whoa. Not everyone who just calls me Lord, Lord will enter my kingdom, but only the one who does the will of my Father. What is the will of your Father? Love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And away from me, you who practice evil, Jesus says, because when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. And he goes on this explanation of you passed me by in the beggar on the street because I am them. When I look at the beggar, I see myself is clearly what Jesus is saying. So don't come to me saying, calling me Lord, Lord, and think you're going to enter my kingdom. I don't care what you say. I don't care what words you choose to come out of your mouth. I care what you do and how you prove that you walk this walk, that you are my disciple. He said, and if you are my disciple, you will obey my commands. And I just find this to be incredibly parallel to NDEs, that Jesus' gospel was the gospel of love. Love God, love your neighbor, embody the love of God. And that is the only standard we are judged by, according to the millions of recorded NDEs that we have. And I think that's good news.
I think it's wonderful news. It should be a relief for many people. It was a relief for me to come into this understanding, and then to know it, to begin to experience what that is like and to embody that in my life has made life both miraculous and magical for me, and in a way that clearly, as we've been discussing, religion, I don't believe ever could, not, at least not for me. But, the law of one had a big effect on you. Do you, like, if you could sum up the law of one in a few sentences, how would you do it for our audience who may not have stumbled upon the work yet? Mm-hmm.
Well, there's many ways I could define it, but if I just wanted to give the simplest, most succinct definition, I would say one life, one being, one reality is all that there is. There is not two in our universe. That's what the law of one means. And so Jesus taught the law of one, obviously, when he said, when you don't love the least of these, you don't love me. And when you do love the least of these, you did love me. The least of these, it's an idiom. It's a way of Jesus saying no one is left out from this equation. Jesus even taught enemy love, right? Love your enemies, bless those who persecute you, go the extra mile, turn the other cheek. He gave us no excuse to hate or judge or separate ourselves from anybody. And so really in a wider metaphysical context, the law of one to me is the ultimate and singular law that the entire universe is governed by. You could almost in a sense see it as a kind of unified theory.
Yeah.
But in essence, what it is that you are the only being in existence and you are not this person. This person is just a temporary dream character. There is only God. Everything and everyone everywhere is God, an expression, a manifestation of God. And so if you harm anyone else, you are harming yourself, which means you must experience the same harm you do unto others. Or in other words, to the exact degree that you attempt to violate the law of one, which is to do harm, the law of one, you could define it as do no harm. You could say it that way. It's really hard to define the law of one or any law, any spiritual law, in a positive sense, right? The law of one is do this.
Because of the word law,
Yeah. And it respects free will. The law doesn't tell you do this. That's not how it works. The law says don't do this. Anything else, free will, go for it. But if you do this, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to pay for it. And it even does allow us to violate the law, of course. But the exact measure that you try to violate the law must violate you in equal measure, because we live in a perfectly balanced universe. God is all balance and perfection. So you cannot imbalance the universe by even perceiving somebody as being separate from you. Even so much as a thought that I'm not connected to you, we're not one. Any kind of judgmental thought immediately is a violation of the law of one. And it's a small violation. It's nowhere near as big of a violation as if you went over and killed the person, of course. But it is still a small violation. And so you will attract small violations into your own life. And so that's why Jesus' gospel is the true way to the Father, as Jesus said. Jesus really did show us the perfect way to God, which is why he was the Messiah, the anointed one, the Hamashiach. And what he said was, in Luke chapter 6, judge and you will be judged, condemn and you will be condemned, forgive and you will be forgiven. For the exact measure that you measure out to another will be measured out back to you. And then he says, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. And that's kind of a first century way of saying, with accumulated energy, right? And so there's that aspect of the law, is like, if I hit the law this hard to violate it, the law hits back.
It's cause and effect, baby.
A little bit harder.
That is the
right?
law, cause and effect.
And here's why the law hits back a little bit harder, is because we get extremely numb to our patterns and habits, right? So if the consequences never level up for the same behaviors, we stay asleep. And so God, in God's infinite intelligence, makes sure that the law hits back a little bit harder than you hit it, than you violated it, right? And in this way, suffering serves a great divine purpose, to be the catalyst for awakening, to awaken us from our spiritual slumber. And so there's another reason to take great issue with the concept of hell and eternal conscious torment, is that suffering in that crazy universe serves no purpose at all. It's as if God created something without purpose, which is impossible. If there's no redemptive purpose in suffering, there's no glory to God for that. So if God can't redeem people, God can't be glorified. And the Bible says everything God does glorifies God. So what about mindless, meaningless torture that's totally unjust? I mean, imagine even if you sinned every nanosecond of your life for 80 years, you would at worst justify 80 years of suffering, and then you're set free, you're redeemed, you've learned your lesson, right? No, forever. It's like this totally unjust punishment. So suffering isn't like that. It's not God's mindless anger and vengeance. It is a evolutionary design of the universe that causes us to continually expand our consciousness. And that's basically what the law of one is all about. It is the law that is pushing the needle of evolution forward in every corner of the universe, because you cannot actually violate it. And so the consequences of trying to violate it wake you up to the law. This is how the Creator teaches his creation, his or her creation, about God's laws. God doesn't need to write an infallible book to one specific culture.
Or stone tablets.
Or stone tablets. God writes God's laws upon our hearts and upon creation all around us. And so even if you were stuck on a desert island your entire life and never had access to a Bible, you better believe you would still be able to know God. God would still meet you there, and you would still be able to learn about the nature of God, because it's manifested in creation all around you.
That's right.
And you would learn through the trial and error of, when I judge, when I separate, when I commit harm to others, I end up suffering. So that must be a violation of universal law.
It's perfectly put. My understanding of it is probably not even close to yours, but my understanding is that the law, that word is more means the truth of this. The truth of the fact that it's all this polarity that we're living in, and the duality and the good versus evil. that is an experience that we're having, but it is not the truth of this universe and the what the Creator has created, and how that plays out, because in the end it all works out. It has to work out. It's already worked out in a very real and literal way, and that, I believe, is the truth of one, the truth of unity, is that in the end, there is no end. There's always going to be quote reconciliation for whatever has happened, and that's evolution. That's cause and effect. That's what we're living through and literally dealing with as a species every day. As you look out into this planet, we're trying. Clearly, there's some things we haven't figured out. Many of us, and the consequences of those things are very apparent if you turn on the news. And so that's why I believe this work is so vital to hit the ears of people today, as much as it ever has, if not more.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. And a couple of thoughts to what you just said. First is the idea of law. It's important to understand also that a law, a spiritual law, is just an expression of God's nature. It's not like something God at one point thought about and invented it, and then you're gonna
get jail time.
Put it into the universe.
Yeah.
It's just based on God's fundamental nature. God is one. Deuteronomy 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Isaiah 45. I am the Lord, and besides me there is none else. So even the Bible teaches this oneness, right?
Yeah.
There's only one being in existence. And so that's the law of one. God's nature becomes God's laws in the same way that, like, I'm a human being with a human body. My human body operates on certain biological laws and principles that make up what I am. So it's like the way my blood circulates, the way I breathe and send oxygen to my brain and all this stuff. I didn't come up with that. I didn't establish that at some point. It's part of what I am. It's an expression of what I am. And that is the law of one. So it's a very liberating truth for people to realize, because typically what I want to do more than anything, Faust, is I want to provide the world with satisfying answers to these deep ontological questions. What is evil? Why does evil exist if God is good? And typically you only see, a Christian apologist versus an atheist debating these things. And they're so disparate and far apart in their worldviews that no agreement really ever happens. And I can sit down and debate or discuss with atheists or Christians and have a lot of areas of agreement, and then use those areas of agreement to say, now, because we agree on this fact, omnipotence, right? Then this is why I say evil does not exist. It is an illusion. It appears to exist for sure, and it has effects. But what we're saying is, ontologically, we have to be consistent. We cannot proclaim one power and then invent a second power called evil that's duking it out with good, and good versus evil. And, God and the devil, who's going to win? Who's going to win? That is not omnipotence, right?
No.
And so evil, when we say evil doesn't exist, we aren't saying you don't experience it, it doesn't seem to exist, people don't suffer, bad things don't happen. No, we're saying it isn't based in reality. Evil is based in the contradiction of reality. It is based in the ignorance of reality. It is spiritual blindness, not spiritual knowledge. It's not based in truth, but falsity. And so, yes, while people believe in falsity and delusions, they can have great power and effects in the material realm. But when investigated, they don't have any substance. And so in the law of one, they actually call the distinction they give is the negative polarity in consciousness and the positive polarity in consciousness. And they say that every human being is much like a quantum particle that needs to choose a charge. So protons have a positive charge, electrons have a negative charge. A particle cannot do work without a charge. And work in physics basically just means the ability to create change in your environment. So a particle can't create any change in its environment without a charge. And so the law of one says you're like that. Every soul is like that. And we come to this earth plane to make that choice between what we would call good and evil. They say it's really the positive polarity and the negative polarity. And positive does not mean good, and negative doesn't mean bad. Positive means expanding, negative means contracting or absorbing. So that which is negative is that which draws into itself, which consumes, which possesses, which
Isolates,
controls.
contradicts. Yeah.
And the positive is the opposite, that which gives and shares and benefits and blesses and helps. And so every soul has to choose between this light and darkness. And they call the negative polarity the path of that which is not, because it's based in, and this is just basic metaphysics, right? Everything has to have an opposite in order to exist. Without an opposite, you cannot experience it. And so if God's going to create a physical universe that it can experience itself through, well, God only has its own nature to work with, right? There's not like a second God it can go to and borrow a different nature and make the universe. Where's the evil God? Let me go find the evil God. Hey, come over here, buddy. Let's create a universe. No. God creates out of its own being. All creation is extension. Even Genesis 1:26 says we're made in God's image and likeness.
Yeah.
So we look like and act like God is what it's saying. And if God's going to put its own essence into creation, it needs to create the exact opposite of that as well. And so the negative polarity is serving a very important divine function. It's serving the Creator. It's not fighting against the Creator, as religion believes. But it is meant to be the exact opposite of God's nature. And so now we have God's exact nature, which is love, the positive polarity, and the exact antithesis of God's nature, which is fear or separateness on the negative. And it's only by that contrast that we can know God. And in fact, there's an amazing Christian Jewish scripture from the 2nd century, from the Nazarenes. It's called the Clementine Recognitions. And it says, consciousness of God requires evil. It's an amazing passage from the 2nd century, from the earliest followers of Jesus, the Nazarenes. They said, consciousness of God requires evil. And I completely agree with that. And so even evil is a servant at God's feet in that sense, because it's not really real. It doesn't actually affect or change anything real in the same way that a dream doesn't, right? You would never say, hey, Faust, you didn't experience your dream last night.
Right.
Nobody would tell you that.
But
they would say it wasn't real, right?
Yeah.
That's the nature of evil. While you're in it, while you're suffering in this physical world, yes, it's extremely real and tangible and painful and challenging. But in eternity, it doesn't exist, and it doesn't change or alter who you are. You are forever one with God. You are forever a divine expression of God.
Right.
And that's the good news Jesus came to preach.
That is the good news. That's the biggest things that I think humanity fears in general are the things that are impossible. You know, like you can't really ever die. You can, this physical body can expire, but you can't. You know, you're going to keep going as you did before. And you know, we have all these hang-ups about being separate, and meanwhile there's no way to be separate. You know, you are an extension of, you can't be separate. But you know, I'm wondering, because you've discussed the concept of enlightenment extensively, and what do you think the most misunderstood aspect of it is in modern spiritual circles from your observation?
Yeah, this is an easy question, and it's easy because I did it in my 2-week experience. I would say that the biggest misnomer about enlightenment is that it's about realizing something. Like, I have to realize a truth that I'm right now not in realization of. So I'm trying to apprehend something. And on its face, it seems like that. It seems like that would be a logical thing, but you can't call that enlightenment because so many people experience that. So many people experience sudden realization. And so I would say, technically speaking, in a moment of profound mystical realization, you are enlightened in that moment. But it's like, who really cares if you can't hold on to it and keep it and integrate it? So it's not really enlightenment if it comes and goes, because enlightenment isn't a state that comes and goes. It is a level of awareness that you eventually come to after much contemplation and spiritual discipline. It's like a philosophical insight about the nature of reality that you have to come to. And when you finally come to this realization of the nature of reality, you can't unsee it. In the same way that you can't unwatch a movie you just watched. It stays with you. It's part of you. And it continues to expand. And so the definition for enlightenment is that I typically give is not realizing the nature of oneness, but not forgetting the nature of oneness, right? It's the not forgetting that is real enlightenment.
Yeah, remembering.
Yes.
Yeah, being reminded of or remembering. I like that. That's, and even then, we have these, we think of the Buddha and we think of Jesus and sure, I imagine the reason why they're such incredibly, respected and profoundly admired teachers was because they found a way to take this enlightenment and embody it almost all of the time. But even then, I feel like you can be an enlightened person and there's going to be moments when this experience in this body puts you in a situation where you may not, no one would be able to tell you were enlightened if they watched you in those 2 minutes, right? I mean, I feel like that is, or possibly, even that I think is like, people think of it like it has to be like a permanent thing, like he's an enlightened dude, like, and maybe he is most of the time, but is he 24/7? You know what I mean? Like, what's your thought on that? Does it? Is it like a new software program where once you're running it, there's no not running it, or is it something that is in motion, can be in motion most of the time, but not all the time?
It's a great question. There was two big things that my 2-week experience of that kind of Satori showed me. One of the things it gave me was this unwavering conviction that enlightenment is absolutely available to the human being, and it's not a pie in the sky thing that only a few remarkable sages across the millennia have achieved. It is a very real state of awareness that anyone can integrate if they're willing to go all in for it, because you're not going to get it unless you're all in, because the ego is all in to keep your attention occupied, right? So you've got to be all in too. But it gave me that conviction that before I didn't have. I very much had doubts that enlightenment was possible at all, but I couldn't stop reading about it because I was so depressed, and this was the one thing that gave me hope of like, maybe there's a better option. Maybe something is available that can set me free. And so once I had that experience of the heavenly state, the kind of free sample of heaven for 2 weeks, I could not deny anymore that it was possible. And then the second thing it gave me was this total commitment, this ferocious commitment to doing whatever it takes to get back there again. And I had a lot of things going for me in my life at that point that were very vain from a material sense. I was a fitness model in San Francisco for a modeling agency, bodybuilder, CrossFit competitor, personal trainer. I had a girlfriend at the time that was not in alignment, and I was just trying to find satisfaction through vanity. And as soon as I got out of that 2-week experience and it kind of went away, I completely walked out of my former life. I had no interest in modeling, competing in bodybuilding, competing in CrossFit. All I cared about was getting back to this state. And so those were two really big gifts that I don't think I would be where I am today without them. Because to get to your question now, enlightenment to me does not mean the ego never arises ever again.
Right.
Even the best sages will tell you that it does, but it's just that the sage has a level of awareness that is so outside of and greater than the ego mind that whenever the ego does arise, it is immediately recognized. And really, it's not even a mental recognition. It's like you can feel it. You can feel when your ego is active because you feel that where you're coming from is a different place. You're not coming from that grounded peace and oneness and connection.
Right.
You're coming from a feeling of separateness or lack that wants to fulfill itself. And so you just, no, I'm not going to act on that and empower that. And I'll give you one example of this was that for me, it was smoking cannabis was like that. In that, in the 2 weeks, it was one of the things that was also clear to me was that there's no doer of actions. There's no personal decider from moment to moment who says, let me choose my next action. I'll do this instead of that. Total fallacy, right? You're being led and guided by bodily impulses and urges and the needs of nature, the forces of nature, the laws of the universe. Everything is puppeteering the human being you think you are and influencing it deeply. So you're not choosing moment to moment the exact thing you want to do. And so when I took that awareness with me out of that 2-week experience, the first thing that happened was I was so desperate not to let go of that state that I started smoking cannabis because I smoked it. And the first time I smoked it after that experience, I'm telling you, bam, it put me right back in it.
Yeah.
I'm like, here it is again. Absolute oneness, non-duality, joy and peace everlasting. I'm back, baby. And then as the high would wear off, the realization would wear off, and I would,
Right.
Got to keep smoking it. And so I was just like, waking and baking for the following weeks, trying to keep that state from slipping away. And then it would still slip away even while I was high, and that was even worse. And so I realized that I had this total addiction and dependency to cannabis to be in the state I wanted. And I realized I don't want to smoke cannabis anymore. I don't want this. I don't want to smoke this ever again. But my body wants it. And every single day around 6 p.m., I get this intense craving to smoke it. And it drove me crazy because I genuinely hated smoking cannabis and could not stop smoking it.
Wow.
And that was my proof that what I experienced was definitely true, that there's no doer of actions choosing to smoke cannabis.
Right.
It's a program, it's a pattern that I've energized over time by giving into it so much that it has this certain inertia in my mind and body. My body craves the substances I've been putting into it.
Yep.
And so it's going to be a long road
Habits.
of untraining my body. So it's like I had the enlightenment in that sense to realize I'm not choosing this and I can't unchoose it. It's just happening. And I can't even really do anything about it. And yet there was the pattern every day for months and months and months before it finally began to dissolve. And that's just one example of so many I could give you. Even today, probably not a day goes by that I don't notice at least one judgmental thought.
Sure.
Usually many. And it creates a very sober state of being where I say, there's still judgment living in me. Where is it? I need to find it. And I look for it in these beliefs of the ego, lack, attachment, control. And I forgive them. I heal them. I accept them. I'm not against you. I don't hate you. And that love is the alchemy, man, that really transmutes what we think we know in our awareness and integrates it into our being and our nature.
Truly it is. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about, your Kundalini awakening, your experience with it, and I have had some personal experience with Kundalini and having an awakening and how intense it can be. And I've had people be like, that is of the devil. And I'm like, wait, what? Obviously you've never experienced it.
You've never had an awakening.
You know what I mean? Like trust me when I say it's not from the devil. But I feel it's what's incredible to me is, you have a university and you have a place that you've created where people can find teachings. And one of the things that you actually teach about these days is Kundalini. And I'm wondering how that came about and how do you put it into your teachings?
Yeah, it's one of the most enjoyable topics to teach on because it's so interesting and it's so validating of all the other things that I teach and that we share, because Kundalini awakening is an inner kind of neurobiological process that naturally sets off once a certain level of spiritual development is gained. And really the development that's gained is the activating of the fourth chakra, the fourth energy center. So the idea is that every human being that's born, the law of one teaches that we are in the third density of consciousness, of which there are 7. And the 7 densities of consciousness are basically like the blueprint of evolution for the soul. But they correlate to our 7 energy centers. So our 7 chakras are like a microcosm of the universe. Or you could say the 7 densities of the universe are like the chakras of the universe. And so every human being, since we're on a 3rd density planet that's just beginning to transition to the 4th density, every human being has the first 3 energy centers in activation from birth, the red, orange, and yellow ray. And we know those to be the primal rays or the ego chakras, typically. that creates your personal sense of self. So I won't go into the dichotomy of all the chakras and densities and what they represent, because that's a huge tangent.
Yeah.
But suffice to say that the solar plexus, the yellow ray below right around the diaphragm area, is the energy center that controls the ego, our personal will, our personal empowerment, and what makes us feel like a unique self in the universe. And so humankind has been in that third energy center for many, many millennia, 75,000 years, according to the Law of One. And we are just now beginning to raise our consciousness to the fourth center. And many beings have done this throughout the course of time, but it's just that it's so rare that it happens that we call it enlightenment. But really, it's just the next phase of human consciousness for everybody, in that, the way that Jesus was in the first century AD with his illumination and his Christ consciousness. That's how everybody on earth is going to be in, 1,000 years, something like that.
Yeah.
It's an inevitable destination. And so as we awaken this fourth chakra, what does the fourth energy center represent? It represents unity consciousness. It's the awareness of love. And so when we live our life according to the gospel of Jesus, turn away from your sins because the kingdom's within you, love God with all of your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. These are the three most heart chakra activating practices anybody can do. And so when you do that, the green ray energy center turns online. And in the same way that the lower three energy centers have to establish relationship to every neuron and atom in the body, the green ray energy center has to begin establishing communication also with every neuron and atom in the body. And so it's this kind of inner purification process that begins when the green ray is activated to a certain extent. And it takes people through one of two experiences, either a blissful, kind of awakening experience of realizing God consciousness, union with God, and it's indescribably blissful. It's the beatific vision, it's typically called in Christian mysticism. And then the other brand of Kundalini awakening is the painful kind, where somebody who has too many spiritual distortions in their lower chakras, too much greed, envy, guilt, trauma, insecurity, pride, on and on. If you have too many blockages in the lower three centers and you somehow activate the green ray enough to kick off Kundalini, then it will go through a kind of trial by fire through your body, and it will begin purging out all of the negative karma or the negative energy in your chakras. And the way that you release or heal any energy is by experiencing it, feeling it, right? That's why we say feeling is healing.
Yeah.
So whatever comes up, it's coming up to be released. But while it releases, it's not fun. Right. It's no different than being sick. When we're sick, our body is attempting to detoxify,
get better,
right?
Yeah.
Expel toxins. And it does that through vomiting, runny nose, fever, sweating,
Right.
diarrhea, rashes. These are all the different ways our body eliminates toxins. And it's painful and it sucks.
Yeah.
But if you go take pharmacy drugs to suppress your symptoms, you don't actually help yourself.
Nope.
You compound the problem. You have to sit in bed, let yourself have a fever, sweat it out, grit your teeth and get through it. Because again, you violated natural law
Right.
unknowingly by putting poison in your body through unhealthy food. And so now the law must violate you by expelling that toxin back out of your body, and it's not fun. And hopefully that teaches you to start eating organic, right?
Perfectly put.
The same is true for all spirituality. It's any energy within us we are trying to heal, it will only become healed by transmuting itself out of the body. And Kundalini kind of kickstarts that in an extremely intense way, so that you have people going through these, I call them die-offs, of different aspects of themselves, different traumas, different negative patterns, beliefs, fears, all become manifested in the mind. And people typically feel like they're losing their mind, and they'll go, maybe I'm becoming schizophrenic or bipolar. I got to go to a doctor. They go to a doctor who's never heard of Kundalini, has no idea what it is. And they say, oh yes, you are losing your mind. Take these drugs. And then a lot of those people end up in a psych ward within a year or two because the drugs make the problem worse. I mean, the last thing you want to do with Kundalini is try to suppress her.
Right.
She does not like that, and she will not stand for it.
No, she will not. That's for sure.
So does that give you enough of the gist?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay,
and,
cool.
And really is well put and articulated in a way that I hadn't quite heard before. And it absolutely does. Yeah. So and it gives me a great understanding of how, I believe that people should be aware of it and realize that it's, it's not just the name of a yogic practice. It's not just, this crazy hallucination that some people imagine they're having, but it is an energy. It is a force of nature. I would call it,
Oh, yes.
And it won't be denied, and
Yeah.
if you are on the path, and you're doing the things that you should be doing, then I think it very well may find you in this life, but if not, it's not like of the devil, and it's nothing to be afraid of,
Yeah, certainly agree. I actually went to a Dispenza retreat.
Oh, you did? Awesome.
Yeah. In 2021, my mom, both my parents have come out of fundamentalism, and they're very much on board with everything I teach about today, which is really cool. But my mom, as she was coming out of, Christian fundamentalism, she was exploring, new thought teachers or whatever you want to call them, and got into Dispenza and really loved Dispenza. And so there was like a private retreat from Dispenza that some of my friends told me about that they were going to go to and invited me to go to. And I said, okay, let me buy my mom a ticket for her birthday and we'll go together. And so we went to this retreat and we did the breathwork stuff he does, which is really like just Kriya Pranayama, but like really intense. And he had us do this round, 30 rounds of intense breathing or whatever. Yeah. And then we did 30 fire breaths and then laid back down really fast. Yeah. Or I think we laid and then did them. And I had this wild experience where electricity shot out of my fingers, like painfully. And I felt it. Like I felt the lightning bolts. It was nuts coming out of my fingers. And I went, oh, like this. And I sit up and look at my hands and there's all these burn marks on my fingers, my fingertips. And then they quickly turned into these big lumps. And so there's bumps all over my fingers where clearly the energy had discharged out of my body. And I'm looking at my hands like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. Like some kind of power just went out of me, almost like Jesus says, in Matthew. I felt power come out of me. It's like, I know what he's talking about now.
Right.
And I was showing people like, do you know what this is? And I was trying to get to talk with Dr. Dispenza to ask him if he'd ever seen this before and didn't get to, but I went home without any answers and very kind of bewildered about it. Yeah. And I'd been learning about Kundalini a little bit, but right after that experience, the symptoms started to ramp up pretty intensely. And so the most notable one was that I'd be laying down at night, and this would happen if I laid on the couch for a while. Anytime I sat still or laid down, this phenomenon would happen of this kind of energy buildup in what felt like my meridians through my arms and especially down my shins and my feet and hands. And I call it volcano veins because it felt like volcano, lava flowing through my veins. And it wasn't painful, but extremely intense. But it was like a heat coming from my own body. And it was so uncomfortable that I would have to get up and walk around my house and stuff. So for months, I would wake up almost every night and have to walk laps through my house to get the energy to calm down or do push-ups or squats, And this happened for months and the symptoms kept increasing. And so I knew this has to be what people describe as Kundalini. I don't think even Dr. Joe mentioned the word Kundalini at the retreat.
He won't use that word, no.
Yeah, because it's a little bit taboo.
Right.
But I started consuming literature on it because I'm like, I need to figure out what's going on in my body. And so I especially was, reading a lot of the Gopi Krishna books. He wrote many, many books on Kundalini. Biology of Kundalini by Hannah Dixon is an amazing one. And I just started learning what is this thing. And then I started seeing it in the Law of One. And the Law of One does teach a little bit about Kundalini. But it all kind of culminated one night in 2021 when my girlfriend at the time, had made pho, or we ordered pho, and she made some cookies or something. So we ate a lot of carbs that night, and we're like watching Gaia on the couch or something. Yeah. And I got restless leg syndrome really bad. Have you had that before?
I haven't, no. I don't think I have.
Oh, you haven't? Okay. Yeah, not everybody has experienced it. It's a kind of a unique thing, but it's very uncomfortable, let's put it that way. And you're writhing around and you're trying to flex and stretch your legs, and you can't get that feeling of tension out of your body, out of your legs. So I'm literally like writhing like this, and my girlfriend's like, what's wrong, babe? And I'm like, I don't know. I just have crazy restless leg syndrome. So it just gets worse. We end up going to bed. I'm laying on my stomach because it felt more comfortable. And I'm just like, and writhing around. And I did that for like 2 hours. I could not fall asleep. I was exhausted. And I finally fell asleep from exhaustion and passed out. And I don't know how long I was asleep. It felt like seconds, but it might have been minutes. But I all of a sudden felt this. The way I describe it is if you like attached a fire hose to the bottom of my spine, to my tailbone, and shot water up my spine. It felt kind of like that.
Yeah.
This incredible burst of energy up my spine, and the classic Kundalini symptoms happen where my back arched like this, and I'm in bed, so I'm doing like a Superman, if you can imagine it, on my stomach. And I'm in this portal of light in my mind, and this was the most amazing part to me, was that I'd probably only seen a depiction of Shakti as she's, painted in the Hindu depictions of her. Yeah. With, 6 arms, the kind of...
And there she was.
Yeah, kind of like this blue color between these two colors maybe, and piercing eyes and all that. And in this portal of light appears Shakti in her Hindu form with the 6 arms and the eyes of light piercing into my soul. And I'm just in awe of this. I'm like, oh my God, she actually looks like the Hindus paint her.
She does. She really does.
Have you seen her like that?
I have seen her like that in the same experience,
No way.
I swear to God. I was like, and I've never, at the time, really, especially at the time, I had never, but you recognize her because she looks like, and there she is, and, in my different experiences with both ayahuasca and DMT, I see her. You know what I mean? It's unmistakable. You can't miss her. She looks a very specific way.
So you've seen her more than once?
Yeah, I've seen her more than once. And
wow.
Yeah. So I understand exactly what you're saying, and that it's just incredible that there's this archetypal energy that, and I know that like we're not alone. There are other people who talk about like seeing what they believe to be her. Yeah. In the most unexpected time and place. So it's just remarkable, there's so much more going on than meets the eye.
Oh boy. I will say this is the one way that I rationalized it, was I forgot the most important part of the story of what led to this. Was I was doing japa mantra meditations. Are you familiar with those?
No.
It's just when you have the necklace bead of 108 beads, and you're in meditation and you hold one bead and you say a mantra, and then you go to the next bead and you just say the mantra and move down the beads, right? It takes about 10 minutes to get through 108, depending on the mantra. And I was doing the Hare Shakti, Shakti Shakti, Hare Hare, which is like the famous Hindu mantra to invoke Shakti. And I think Hare means like praise or glory to Shakti. And so I normally would do a 10-minute each evening. And I was like, I'm going to go 30 minutes tonight just because I felt like it. Yeah. So I did 3 rounds of japa chanting, so 300 plus mantras. And by the time I was finished, I felt like my body was kind of buzzing a little bit. I was like, woo, I got charged up from that one. And I go downstairs, crush a bowl of pho, have a couple cookies, lay on the couch, and then the restless leg started.
Wow.
So I felt like maybe that invoked the Hindu archetype of Shakti, because, I really believe the collective consciousness is a very real thing, and we create these collective beliefs. And, imagine the power of billions of Hindus across time worshiping and chanting to and revering and imagining and believing in Shakti in this typical Hindu form. It creates an archetypal blueprint that you can connect with. And I don't know if that's for sure what it was, but it's what I feel like it was. And so the divine feminine that Shakti represents is fundamentally real, of course. Yes. It's the divine feminine nature of God. The form of Shakti with the 6 arms and all of that is not real, in that it's a temporary expression of Shakti. I don't think aliens and other beings see the divine feminine in that form. I think it's probably a uniquely human thing, but it's like you're connecting with something real and not real at the same time, which is what makes it an interesting paradox to me.
Absolutely. And then the question of, is that representation what was shown, or what, because perhaps that is just the manifestation that was chosen for this race, and like you said,
Sure.
And probably we'll wrap up with some questions about this, because it's Far Out with Faust is, I do enjoy, and I'm very much on the pulse of the disclosure movement and like what's happened, what's really happened, and what's happening, and just how this human hybrid is a lot more than we've been told and taught, about in its origins, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it, because the law of one is channeled material, not from an ET, but from a collective consciousness,
Civilization, yeah.
Civilization, so to speak, but not obviously from this, universe or even in this time. They're outside of time, but I'm wondering, because obviously there's Christianity and religions are like they, first of all, they believe anyone who channels is probably channeling demonic entities.
Everything's the devil.
Everything is to be afraid of. But, some of the most incredible teachings that I've learned have come from, channeled material and an entity not of this world working through a human. And I'm wondering, do you believe that we're not alone? And do you subscribe to the belief that I do, that we are actually, this pretty unique and remarkable intergalactic royalty, so to speak, and because of how many civilizations contributed to our DNA?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic to ponder over. And I don't have like I believe this for sure type of thing, but there are a lot of corroborations between these different esoteric traditions, whether it's Thoth, Emerald Tablets, Law of One, Wingmakers, we could go on and on, Edgar Cayce. There are a lot of pretty prominent metaphysical sources, Dolores Cannon included, that seem to confirm this idea that a race of extraterrestrials, the Book of Enoch, right. Genesis, also mentions this. The sons of God came down and saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and laid with them and reproduced. Well, we know that that's not possible.
Right.
Aliens that are another species couldn't reproduce with our females. We can't even produce with two different species on our own planet, right. Let alone other planets. So to me, it makes it a little bit more authentic that they describe it like that in Genesis and the Book of Enoch, because it would be a very ancient world way of understanding these giant Anunnaki beings, let's say, with their giant hovercrafts and stuff, and they're performing their typical hybrid experiments where, and the idea is this, the Anunnaki were trying to help humanity. I think the idea is that the Anunnaki came here, hundreds of thousands of years ago when we were like Homo habilis or some part of the species origin. And so they saw these cave-dwelling, monkey-like people that were not very intelligent, but evolving. Yeah. And they're like, how do we help these beings evolve faster? Let's give them some of our enlightenment.
Right.
Were you going to say something?
Oh, no. I had to put your choice of word help in air quotes, and I just found myself doing it, saying help, nice. Because I'm not sure how much they help. They ended up helping, but yeah.
Yeah, helping. And in their view, it was a decided failure, because this is apparently what extraterrestrials do all throughout the universe, is that once you evolve past the third density, which is like, preschool for consciousness, it's where you learn like, this is your nose, and can you touch your ear? That's like third density. It's like good and evil.
Right.
You have to choose. All is one. It's like these basic spiritual concepts. And once you get past that, the whole universe is kind of a playground to explore the one infinite creator. And so because, let's say we're an alien race encountering another planetary civilization that's far less evolved, we would, on the positive polarity, we would not see it as an act of infringement if they accepted this invitation to create a hybrid between the two of us and help their species evolve a little bit quicker, because we're literally trying to give them enlightenment.
Right.
And aliens try to perfect the process of helping other species evolve without causing detriments.
Right.
And it's quite a razor's edge, man.
It
You can
is.
do something that you think this is very good, and this will only contribute to goodness, and it just goes to a disastrous conclusion. And that's kind of what apparently happened with the Anunnaki. But the Law of One gives an interesting twist to this. And they said what this race of beings did was they turned up the human emotional response. They turned up our emotions because they said if we can cause these beings to feel more, remember we said earlier, suffering is the causal mechanism for evolution. It serves a divine purpose to wake us up and move the needle of evolution forward. And so they said if we turn up the emotionality of these creatures, they will evolve much faster. And I think that we probably did because, we have this anomaly of the human brain size doubling over 200,000 years, which is a total anomaly that biologists can't explain. So maybe that would explain it. But in the end, it was a decided failure because it created hierarchies and superior, inferior classes.
Right.
But getting back to the sons of God seeing the daughters of men were beautiful. Imagine these ancient Homo habilis humans, pre-humans, proto-humans,
Couldn't have been
watching these giant Anunnaki beings taking their women into the UFOs.
Yeah.
And, if you listen to Dolores Cannon, she does a lot of regressions with people that have had abductions, and they all describe this process almost identically, which is that they get somehow impregnated or implanted through technology with the DNA of the alien species, and then they somehow know how to accelerate the fetal growth process through energy, light, code technology. And so they grow a little tiny alien being about that big that the woman, gives birth to. And so it's painless, it's quick and easy. And then they bring the woman back to Earth, wipe her memory, and that's that. And they have a hybrid. They've done no harm to anyone. They've had full consent and free will involved. And they get this little hybrid, and then it grows into a full being.
Right.
And so imagine these ancient humans seeing these huge Anunnaki beings taking their women into the UFOs, and they're coming out with these baby hybrids.
Right.
Like, oh, they're screwing our women in there. And, they wouldn't know the technology that was really being used and that it wasn't happening through intercourse.
Right.
So I find that to be an interesting thing in those books of the way that an ancient world might describe that phenomenon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I believe we were on a path of evolution that probably, while it may have taken considerably longer, it probably would have been a lot more, let's say, smooth, maybe a lot less of the kind of upheaval that we're seeing. But, I believe that just as we've been talking about, all these things are allowed to happen because they all offer the opportunity for evolution, right? So whatever the Anunnaki's intentions were when they came down and they started tinkering with the native species that were here, this planet, and I believe was already, we were already chosen. We were already on a path, but the Anunnaki had their own ideas. And this is a universe of free will. And so they were allowed, to proceed, and they did. And it, like you, I also believe that it ended up probably doing more harm than good, but not because look where we are, we're still going through it, and we're still figuring it out. But it's fascinating to me. It's always interesting I think that if the truth ever comes out about our origins, then this type of philosophy that we've been talking about is going to be the surviving philosophy, because I think one of the reasons why the United States government has kept this from people, and the world, is because it would dismantle a lot of the religious concepts and those governing bodies of religion, the Vatican, and those are the wealthiest, most powerful entities on this planet. I mean, entities like organization, governments, and what would happen to the followers of these religions if they found out that, well, when Genesis said God created the Bible in 7 days, it's not exactly the way it went down, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's just a lot there but one of the things that does remain, I think, that resonating with me and universally true is that we are all one. We just haven't figured it out yet. Most of us haven't realized what that means and how to embody that yet. But for many of these races, particularly the ones with benevolence and, that are watching and trying to influence us in a way that does not interfere, they know that, and they are infinitely patient, I guess, watching us trying to figure it out.
You bet they are. I mean, gosh. One of the ways I describe where we are is, I call it the acclimation phase, because I don't know what else we would call it. But to me, we're clearly in this kind of acclimation phase with extraterrestrial contact, in that they are showing themselves to us and have been for a very long time, but they aren't coming openly. There's no open contact, but they're undeniably making their presence known. Mm-hmm. And this goes way back. I mean, there's, newspaper Absolutely. Articles from like the 1800s about airships and stuff. So who knows how long they've been doing this, but if you're a biologist or whatever, and you're studying an animal in the wild in its natural habitat, one of the things you don't do is run up to the animal with a camera and snap pictures of it or try to talk to it, because you're going to scare it off.
Right.
And so ETs are doing that with us. We're the scared animals, and they're the intelligent scientists studying us. And they know and understand that this is a highly religious planet. Mm-hmm. And one thing I didn't explain about the positive and negative polarity is that the way you advance, or it's called polarizing in the law of one, the way you gain more positive polarity is by honoring free will, protecting free will, and never infringing on free will. Mm. And the negative polarity is the opposite. It's you gain negative polarity by taking away the free will of others through their tacit agreement. You got to deceive people.
Manipulation.
Yeah, into giving you their power. They can't just like throw you in handcuffs and put you in a prison cell and gain negative polarity. They've got to get your agreement, because it's all about free will. Free will is the elixir of polarization.
Yes.
So the positive polarity desperately wants to avoid infringement on free will, because it's very depolarizing if they do that. And they want to only be of service in the best way possible. And so that to me is the main reason why there's no open contact, because of the 4-5 billion religious people on our planet that would have their reality upended pretty badly.
Yeah.
And they don't want to do that. And so they're probably waiting until we reach a more universal spirituality. One note of this is that in the law of one, they said that they came to the Egyptians.
That's right.
They is Ra, by the way. Mm-hmm. They're identified as Ra, not to be confused with the Egyptian sun god.
Right.
But when they came to Egypt, supposedly 11, 12,000 years ago, the Egyptians were pantheists at that time, where they believed everything is God. The sun is God, the moon is God. And so the law of one civilization called Ra saw this as agreeable, not infringement, to go contact them. They already believe all is one, and that's the message we come to preach. And so they left Egypt because Egypt turned it into a hierarchy yet again, as humans always do, and created classes and stuff. But they called the social memory complex Ra. They called them Ra, thinking that they were the sun god who had come down from the heavens, right? And so they just used the name they were given. But this is what Ra explains how this happens, is that they have to ameliorate some of the distortions they caused on this planet by giving the law of one and having it get distorted for power over others. And so they said that they waited until the 1980s when they finally found a group of channelers that was harmonious enough to contact. And to me, channeling is just, again, the next phase of communication for all humans. It should be obvious that mind-to-mind communication is much superior than verbal communication, much faster. And so it is the next evolutionary marker we're reaching towards. And it's really no different than looking at the density beneath us, the second density. You know, if you look at dogs, for example, we have two little tiny dogs that, you know, they're not the smartest. They know a couple of human words, but you compare them to like a Labrador retriever, you know, a hunting dog or something. Those dogs are wicked smart.
Yeah.
They can almost speak human language. Like they understand very complicated ideas compared to like little puny dogs with small brains.
Yeah. Those
so you can imagine
live longer though.
That's true. That's true. They get that benefit. But like imagine the little dogs watching the German Shepherd that's super intelligent, listening to the owner speak these crazy noises. They
Yeah.
have no freaking clue what their owner's saying. Like, I'll tell my dog today, he's outside and he's like standing by the door. I'm like, come in, buddy. And he just
Yeah.
stares at me.
Yeah.
He has no idea what I'm saying. And I'm like, God, I have to pick him up and bring him inside. Imagine if, my little dog watched a golden retriever interacting with humans. They'd be like, he's channeling,
Right.
he's communicating with a higher intelligence. And they would think it was this mysterious thing.
Yeah.
That's just how I see channeling, is like these beings only use their mind. I mean, when you look at an ET's depiction, their brains are always depicted as being
Right.
enormous in size. Their eyes are pictured as being gigantic
Yep.
on their face with almond shaped, right? All black. I mean, look at how much black is in my eye.
Yeah.
I have like a tiny circle of black, and that's where the light comes in. Imagine how much of the light spectrum an extraterrestrial's taking in with those giant almond eyes that are all black and a gigantic brain. I mean, they can read your mind like reading a newspaper. It's easy. So like we will get there. So
Yeah.
channeling, it's like always seen as so esoteric and woo-woo. I'm like, nope, it's absolutely the next phase of human evolution.
Agreed. We agree on that, my friend. Before I let you go, I have one more question for you. And you tell me, I'm so excited to hear what you're going to say. If you could plant, as a teacher, if you could plant one idea or practice into the collective consciousness of this human planet right now, that could instantly take root and probably change things in a profound way, what would it be and why?
Yeah, the answer to that question is very easy. But I would find it difficult to know how to give that spiritual truth to the world in a way they would understand it, which would be the understanding that all is one. And so you must love your neighbor as yourself, or you incur the law of one against you. You incur karma against yourself. So the idea that what you do to others is done unto you, maybe not in the same exact way, maybe not right away, but at some point, usually sooner rather than later, you will experience the same negative feelings you made somebody else feel by harming them or abusing them. If people knew that, again, God's laws are so perfect and just, and God has already established these perfect, immutable laws that govern everything and cannot be changed, right? They're immutable, but man is unaware of them. And even Jesus says this in the Gospel of Thomas. He says, the kingdom of heaven is already spread out across the earth, but men are unaware of it. So he's like, it's already the case. You don't have to wait for the kingdom. That was not Jesus' message. The kingdom is coming someday later. He's like, no, y'all been waiting for the kingdom of God to come. I'm telling you, it's here now and within you. That's what I would try to communicate to people, because you have to understand the metaphysical implications of doing harm to others in order to truly want to love others as yourself.
Yeah.
Because as A Course in Miracles says, man, forgiveness and love offer you everything you want. Peace of mind, groundedness in reality, a deep sense of purpose, joy and happiness in daily living. Forgiving everything you judge is the way to heaven, is the way to peace.
Yes.
And yet humans have infinite excuses for holding on to judgments. And why? Because they do not really perceive the consequences of holding them, because they don't perceive the law of one. And Jesus told this in so many parables, this law of giving and receiving. And we already quoted a few of those passages, but even in the parable of the sower is a clear one, right? The seed that falls on the good soil grows into a harvest. The seed that falls on bad soil doesn't.
Right.
And so not everyone has fertile soil for this. So I don't know how I would, transplant that into everybody,
Right.
but for sure, if you wanted to change the world overnight, love your neighbor as yourself is the fast track to doing that.
Absolutely. Amen to that, brother.
Amen, brother.
It's been a pleasure. Listen, for everyone listening, if you are not subscribed, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on an audio platform, please drop us a review. They go a long way as we grow our audience. And Aaron, thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, for sharing. It's been incredible, man. It was even better than I imagined. And I'm grateful for your time. I know you're busy, and I know you're a new father, and I'm wishing you and your family the best. I'm actually having Alec Zek on in January. I know you guys are buddies. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my best friends.
So I'm excited about that. But thank you again so much for your time, man. I appreciate it, brother.
It's been a pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.